and guest today is very, very interesting in so many ways because she has gone through the challenges. And that's what entrepreneurs and people that have a vision and want to go out and give back to the community and help people. So my guest today is Daria Burke. Um, and Daria, I love the fact that your book is of my own making. And I'm so excited to talk to you about this. It's a must read, but there's so many things when you talk about childhood trauma and how you're leading back through this, how you're going through the process. And through this book, it was really self-reflecting, wasn't it?
It was. It was. I definitely feel like it allowed me or forced me, I don't know which, to come in contact with a lot of versions of myself, and in some cases, versions that at the time may have felt too fragile to make the journey here. And so it was also very much, I think, a reclamation and kind of a knitting together of all those aspects of my life in a special way.
So let's talk about childhood trauma. Did you identify it was childhood trauma from the beginning when you kind of to where your success is today? Because a lot of entrepreneurs, people in the C-suite, we know how to go through adversity. We know how to get literally hit back many, many times. So that's why we
Hmm.
get back up and fight again. So tell me
Yes.
kind of that journey without giving the book away, but more of just that process of where you saw it self-reflecting. Did you identify childhood trauma later in your life, or was it early in once you kind of got out?
I was an adult, certainly. I was in business school. I will tell you, even now, it's taken me years to even use the word abuse, because that was hard. I think accepting that can be really difficult. But I was about 26 when it first registered that it was a series of traumatic events that I had experienced as a child. And it was through therapy that I sort of, stumbled into therapy and then found myself being confronted with the reality and having someone actually name it for me. It took a while, I think, to metabolize that idea because you're right. I think it's very easy to think about our resilience as such a strength and all the ways in which we're forged through challenging experiences. But there is a distinction between adversity and challenging experiences and childhood trauma and abuse. And it was important to name it as it really is.
How did you define it as abuse that you didn't see it as a child as abuse, or even until you said your 20s?
I think I probably knew it. I just couldn't admit it and I couldn't say it out loud. I didn't tell my story to anyone for many years. I was in college before I told even my first friend about the childhood that I had growing up with, my dad was largely absent, but both of my parents struggled with drug addiction and I grew up in extreme poverty. And to say that out loud, in some ways, I think felt very much like bringing it back into the life that I was running away from. So it took me a while to be able to say it. I think it's as healing as is a practice. I think the stories that we tell ourselves and the relationship that we have with those stories is also evolving. And so I can mark certainly at 19 telling a friend for the first time, at 26 going to therapy, at 31, 30, different milestones in my life where I formed a different level of relationship to the way in which I was brought up and the ways in which it was traumatic.
Well, absolutely. And you think about these things, but you identified those factors. But what about extreme poverty? How it really, at times, even for me who grew up in an upper middle class family, I had
Mm.
poverty as an entrepreneur. I was almost
Yes.
homeless multiple times after my separation and divorce. So I
Mm.
had to go through all those different things of confronting not having enough money as a child, you see that from your family. You see it from specific things. And how did that kind of shape you in a way that wasn't good? And it also shaped you in a good way. And this is where the
Yeah.
reflection has to every experience we live in life. That happens. It really does.
Absolutely. It does. And I think it's just sometimes a question of when it happens. It was important to me to look at what scarcity does to the brain and how it can inhibit its ability to create, to innovate, and to dream,
Yeah, truly.
because I think our environments absolutely play a critical role in that. When you're steeped in that, when that's integral or foundational to your early years, recreating that becomes easy to do when your sort of first initial wiring is rooted in lack. I think for me, I it was so obvious that we were deeply poor. We would go without a working telephone, our lights would get turned off. We didn't have running water sometimes.
Oh my God.
I've
Yeah.
taken one inch baths before. So I think I was really clear as a young person what poverty was. And by the time I got to high school, I got a vision of what it was not. I went to school
Right,
with a
right.
lot of upper middle class kids. I tested into my high school, so it was a college preparatory school. And so I was surrounded for the first time by people who had real means, and I
Mm,
could understand what that also looked like. And but I think, and so I spoke a little bit to how it can negatively impact us. It limits our thinking. It ultimately shrinks our view, and our
mm.
focus is just on
Yep.
survival. When you have more and you actually aren't in survival mode so much, you then can expand and
Right.
have the capacity to start to imagine more as well.
So, how did you overcome? So, you had that scarcity mindset growing up. Okay, so I had the same scarcity mindset. Okay, because my father
Well, I
was
don't
from
know that I
depression.
did. If I could
Okay,
say,
so
I don't know that I
you
did,
know
but
did, but it was in
I
your, it
think
still was
it's
in your subconscious in some sort of way.
yes,
If
yes,
I had that conversation with you, okay, this is us
yes,
working therapy session. You've never thought
exactly,
radio, podcast, TV interview. We're having a therapy
exactly.
session right now.
That's
That's
right.
okay because we're sharing war stories. But you had that in your subconscious, that scarcity. How did you get out? First of all, then I want to go to when you saw that childhood trauma. What did it make you do that caused
Mm.
other relationships hurt, other things hurt, till you finally overcame those? In a way
Yeah,
without giving the book away. There's more of a therapy session. We're throwing things at each
I
other and
love
seeing
it.
how it is. Yeah.
Seeing how it sticks. No, it's great. I mean, I think certainly I was surrounded by scarcity, and I knew that that was at play. I think understanding the ways in which it showed up in my life really manifest in the ways that I played small, the ways in which I would tell myself, oh, and that sounds funny for some people because I'm extremely ambitious and I have a
Very
resume that
successful.
many
Yes.
people would find impressive. But staying in jobs where I wasn't allowed to flourish and be expansive and bring my talent because maybe someone felt threatened by that, or staying in relationships too long where you think that, gosh, if this person just could understand that, communication is good or whatever it is, that you think that you can sort of love somebody through or stick it out through difficult times. And it can be tempting to tell yourself that this is the best it's going to be, even especially when you've achieved a certain level. So when you're at a company like a L'Oreal or an Estee Lauder, it can be very easy and tempting to say, I've got this big job, I have a lot of responsibility. Why would I question that? I think the ways in which I got out of it were painfully,
No, but so
usually.
you got to this point. I'm asking, so you misunderstood my question. I definitely want to see how you got yourself when you were in these high C-suite positions to where you are now. But what about getting out of poverty? How did you do that? Was that just
Mm,
straight, I'm motivated, focused in school,
yes.
I'm not going to take anything, and used the scarcity mindset as a good thing, not a bad thing, saying I'm never going to put myself in that position, and maybe
Yeah, I think
overworked yourself, did certain things because you were always afraid that there would be not enough money?
yes, absolutely. I mean, I think fear of lack, fear of not feeling safe, of having stability, for me was the root of all of it and really drove me for years. And school was the way out. It's really simple. When you're a kid, you don't have a lot of options. I got my first job at 14, 15 years old, but before that, all I had was school. And that was where I did well and I was affirmed. And I saw that as the way out. And that was enough of a meme, particularly in the 80s and 90s, where you could believe that if you were a good student and you did well,
You
that
got
that
out.
was a gateway out. And
And
so
this
that's
might
I
not anymore, but that time absolutely was.
tunnel vision. And I think for a lot of people that is still true. I think that there are ways in which, in particularly, as a woman and a Black woman, where having an education and having access to the best universities played a meaningful role in my ability to do so.
Absolutely. So you worked hard, you overworked yourself, meaning you worked really hard in school to get to where you are. Then once you got to school, you worked to be the very best. And then when you got to the jobs, you the very, very best. So you identified probably through that scarcity mindset that the only way I could do it is work really, really hard and have tunnel vision and forget about the things around me. And then that's when you identified for yourself, oh my gosh, I want more, and went to therapy and then uncovered why. Does that
I
sound?
ish, yes, I had a tunnel vision in getting out, absolutely. And I saw that as the only way out. And I was running away from Detroit. When you come from family addiction and violence, um, you either get mired in it or you run away from it. I ran away from it. My decision to go to therapy was quite accidental. I went wanting to troubleshoot one specific problem. My graduation from business school was coming up. I knew that I wasn't going to have family or anybody in attendance there, and that was going to be noticed by my classmates. And I hadn't told most of them, they didn't know about my family background. And I went to therapy to try to figure out how to script what I would say when that time came. And it was only then that my therapist said, well, wait, help me understand, why won't anybody be there? And where are your parents? And all of that. And that was the beginning of the healing journey and kind of the awakening to, oh, the getting out wasn't the work, air quote.
Yeah.
The work starts now.
So once you talked to the therapist, what were the underlying things? You talked about childhood trauma, but what about in your personal life that now? Because if we overcame it, we got to where we are, we're just completely focused on success, success, and
Yes.
growing. There was a missing thing the therapist spotted at that time, right?
Yeah, a number of things. I mean, number one, she diagnosed me with CPTSD, so complex PTSD, which
Oh.
is after sustained exposure to traumatic events. But also the ways in which I was not allowing myself to be seen, the ways in which I had over-identified with performance and success, and how singular in a lot of ways my identity was as a result of that, and how that manifested in relationships that I had. I was dating someone at the time, and my therapist and I had come up with the exercise for me to ask him, who am I if you take my resume away? Who am I without all of these things? And he was like, that's crazy. I don't know. I couldn't dare to answer that question. You are all of these things. You've achieved them. And I think it was such a window into the way in which that I was not always allowing myself to be seen fully beyond what I thought I had to offer people, which in my mind at that time, we're talking 15 years ago, was the resume, was the success, was the performative aspects of all the things that made people go, ooh, that's
Right.
cool. Yeah.
Exactly, because you're a high achiever, but you're dealing with specific things. So you really, as I said, probably had a lot of tunnel vision and relationship, everything, because it was all focused on your career and your resume. And that was a great
Yes.
point. So, what did you do to heal yourself? Even though, in a way, that you were on your way, what an
Yes.
accomplishment you've accomplished to get to where you are. But
Thank
what
you.
did you do in the healing? Because you and I were talking on off air about, you talked about neuroplasticity. I saw it in your
Yes.
press release and things like that. And I talk about, bioneurofeedback and having this on my brain and going through these. I'm sharing things I've never shared on a show, but I do these
Wow.
now. That's how I go ahead and that's how I've decided. Go out there, throw it to the world, and who cares? But
Yes.
ultimately, going through that and viewing those things, what did you kind of say to heal yourself? What things did you do? Because therapy's great, but therapy gives us
Yes.
what we need to work on. People think
Yes.
therapy's going to fix everything. It's not. It's going to be do we need to work on? It's just like going to the doctor. Hey, I have a heart
Yes.
condition. I have something else. But what am I going to do the work when I don't see that doctor, when I'm not
Exactly.
using medication? So good.
Yes, therapy brings it all up, and then you have to figure out what to do with it once it's been raised up. It's like opening that wound. And so for years, I thought that was the work, and it was really when I learned about neuroplasticity that I began to understand what I think I knew intuitively, which is what we learn, we can unlearn, and that our experiences, our anything that we allow ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves, all of that plays a role in the way in which our brain will adapt and form new neural connections in response to them. And so everything from learning a new language to reciting affirmations every morning. If you tell yourself every single day, that you are a powerful and really intelligent person, your brain will look for evidence that that
Mhm.
is true as well. So there are a lot of ways in which our brain can respond. And so for me, it was, I think, that understanding that, oh, I actually have a role in looking at the ways in which the stories I told myself about my childhood are still showing up in my life. And so, whether that's in fear, whether that's in scarcity or lack, whether that is, more importantly, in the ways in which I played small, the people I allowed myself to be around who could keep me in that kind of energetic. But there were so many different modalities that I explored along the way, from journaling to meditation. I did get a brain scan just to understand what does it look like in there and what's happening. I have a very anxious resting brain, a very active
Yeah,
resting
I got the
brain.
brains scanned too, and there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And that has to do with my days as a professional wrestler and trauma
Ah,
through pro wrestling. So that's where I'm so big into ways. I don't know if you ever had bulletproof coffee. That's something that helps with the brain
yes.
with the what is the oils called? The
MCT.
MCT oils and stuff. And
Yes.
I need to get back to that. But those are the things. So what types of things
Yes.
do you do for neuroplasticity? Because I know the book is going to cover everything, but I'm just intrigued
Yes.
by this whole, what we can do with our health is
Yes.
unreal if we really
Yes.
put our health as our wealth. As I was, as Alonzo Mourning was telling me specifically, and how he figured it out, and some other people, if we're not focusing on our health, we
Yes.
can't accomplish anything else.
Yes. I'll give you really simple stuff that I do that anybody can do. Number one, I leave my phone in another part of the house when I go to bed. So my phone is not the first thing that I look at. It is not the last thing that I look at. It's generally a book or my journal. And I think how much of the world we let in, it matters a lot, because that informs a lot of what our thoughts are doing in our brains, right? Um, Another thing, just these are really basic, and I studied neuroscience for business through MIT with Dr. Tara Swart.
Oh
Drink
wow.
water and sleep. It sounds so silly, but it is absolutely critical for you and your brain health to just sleep and drink water. It sounds so basic. Of course, there are certain supplements. I supplement with magnesium. I take magnesium from Moon Juice every night, and that helps with rest. It helps with recovery. It helps with calm and relaxation. I take ashwagandha, and I do take certain supplements that help me with brain stimulation and calm and relaxation, and really priming the brain for good experiences,
Yeah.
by helping lower the nervous system. But I walk. I spend a lot of time in nature and the beach. I mean, these are free things. These are basic things that anybody can
That
do.
human
And
beings are not doing.
it's so important. And I'm overstating these because we always are looking for like some wellness thing, or some place to go to, and those, I think, are interventions that typically we introduce once we've burned out, once we don't know what else to do. And if you can just find a way to feed your brain with the oxygen and the water and the fuel
Mm.
and the relaxation that it needs, you'd be shocked at how much it will do for you.
And I've made some of those changes. I have a lot of my clients are in doctors and in health, and I'm finally saying, okay, I have been doing that, but we fall behind. We
Yes.
slide and all
Yes.
that's. So what is your ultimate goal by writing the book? To tell your story, but it looks like I'm focused more on the whole brain, but I'm really to inspire people too, where you've accomplished and where you're going.
Thank you. For me, ultimately, I want people to understand that you get to choose who you become.
Yeah.
We don't earn our beginnings, right? We don't, for better or for worse. We don't get to take credit for that. Our origin stories are what they are, but what we carry is for us to decide. And that through, yes, my story, which can by itself feel very much like a rags to riches story, and it's not about that, which is why I wanted to introduce the science, to say that with science and soul work, you can find healing in your life. You can rewire your brain and your body for goodness and for well-being.
All right. Best place it's available. Your book is available anywhere finer bookstores, and looking at
Everywhere books are sold.
independent bookstores as well. for sure.
indies
And
and the
what's
big guys.
what are you currently doing? So what is your business? Tell us about you and other things you
Sure.
want to promote.
Well,
Yeah.
the book is out a week now, so
Okay.
my number one focus right now is the book. I sit on the board of several venture-backed companies, including Proudly, which is a baby brand by Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade, and I advise a lot of female founders as well in their business ventures and strategic initiatives. But mostly, this book is my life at the moment, and there are several others that I've started to tinker on.
Well, congrats on all your success and we appreciate it. Thanks
Thank
again.
you so much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
You're listening and watching the Neil Haley Show. We'll be back in just a moment.